Prison life. Surviving the daily struggles inside. The alarm started at 5:14 a.m., long before the sun hit the fog drifting across San Quentin's old stone yard. Warden Monroe moved quickly through the hallway, the sirens echoing off iron beams above him. The system was malfunctioning again, blaring, fading, then suddenly spiking in volume like it was warning of something no one could see. But today felt different. Officers rushed past him, half-dressed in their uniforms, heading toward North Block. Monroe didn't need the radio to tell him where the problem was. He had felt it the moment he woke up. Some days inside a maximum security prison carried a weight in the air, pressure, like a storm building behind the walls. Today was one of them. San Quentin was awake. As he stepped into the long walkway overlooking North Block, the noise stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was worse than the alarms. For 5 full seconds, no one moved. Inmates stood at their cell doors, gripping the bars, staring across the tier as if listening for something. Monroe scanned the floor. Something had happened during the night, something that hadn't reached staff yet. Officer Ramirez approached quickly. "Warden, count is off." Monroe tensed. "Short by how many?" "1," Ramirez said. "But the cameras show no breach. No exit. No sensors triggered." That was impossible. No one simply vanished from a cell block built like a fortress. "Who?" Monroe asked. Ramirez handed him the roster. The missing inmate wasn't a gang leader, not a notorious figure, not someone known for escaping or causing chaos. His name was Devin Ross, a quiet inmate who mostly kept to himself. He had a job in the kitchen, rarely argued with anyone, rarely drew attention. He wasn't someone who disappeared. Monroe walked down the tier, stopping at Ross's cell. The door was locked. The bed neatly made. Nothing broken, nothing disturbed. It looked like a room abandoned deliberately. Ramirez swallowed. "Cameras say he never left." Monroe stared at the empty cell. Then either the cameras are lying, or someone wants us to think he's still inside the prison. He stepped back, eyes narrowing. "Start the internal search. Every floor. Every room." As officers spread out, Monroe walked toward the lower corridor where inmates were lining up for breakfast. Overcrowding made everything harder. Too many bodies, too much tension, not enough staff. Every man in line had his own way of surviving the daily grind. Some kept their heads down, some joined groups for protection, others observed in silence. Monroe noticed an inmate named Lewis King watching him carefully. King had been inside for years and understood the prison better than most staff. Monroe approached him. "You see anything unusual last night?" he asked. King hesitated. "Everyone saw something unusual, Warden." The block felt off. Off how? King's eyes shifted. When the lights flickered before lockdown, people started moving different. Groups that don't normally talk were whispering. And Ross? He wasn't acting like himself. Monroe frowned. "Explain." "He kept checking the hallway," King said. "Didn't eat. Didn't sleep. Like he was waiting on something." "Someone?" Monroe asked. King shrugged. "Nobody talks to Ross. But last night he wrote something on his sheet before lights out." Monroe's pulse quickened. "What did it say?" King looked down the hall nervously. "I didn't get close enough to read it." Monroe scanned the line of inmates, all watching silently. The unwritten code was always alive inside the prison. Never snitch, never betray, never show fear. But now, fear was everywhere. They weren't afraid of Ross. They were afraid of whatever had taken him. Back in the cell, Monroe searched the mattress seams, the wall cracks, the corners under the bunk. Nothing. No notes. No clues. Then, as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A faint line scratched into the metal frame of the bed. He knelt down to read it. "I won't make it to morning." Monroe felt a chill. "Ramirez," he called. "Get forensics. And pull every log from last night. Every movement. Every officer." Ramirez's face tightened. "You think staff is involved?" "I don't know," Monroe said. "But Ross didn't vanish by accident, and he didn't climb through the walls." The deeper they searched, the stranger the evidence became. In the kitchen, Ross's apron was folded perfectly on his locker shelf. In the yard, a guard reported hearing footsteps at 3 a.m., but found no one when he checked. In the infirmary, a nurse claimed she saw a man standing in the hallway but assumed it was a shadow when he disappeared around the corner. Every clue pointed in a direction that didn't make sense. Ross didn't escape outward. He was pulled inward. Into the prison. Into a part of the system no one talked about. Monroe gathered his officers. "We're missing something. Something bigger." As he spoke, Officer Ramirez approached, pale and shaking. "Warden, you need to see this." He handed Monroe a slip of paper. "Found in the laundry room. Placed carefully on top of the machines." Ross's handwriting. 6 words. Words that made Monroe's breath stop. "Check the room behind the freezer." The freezer room was sealed. No inmate had access. No officer had entered it in months. But when they opened the door, what they found changed everything. The heavy freezer door groaned open, exhaling a blast of stale, ice-cold air. Warden Monroe stepped inside slowly, boots crunching on frost-coated tiles. Officer Ramirez swept the corners with his flashlight, the beam bouncing off metal shelves stacked with sealed food crates. Nothing seemed out of place, no broken locks, no signs of forced entry. But Monroe wasn't looking for something obvious. He was looking for something hidden. And he found it, at the back wall. Ramirez moved the crates. Together they pulled the stacked boxes aside. Behind them, the white wall looked slightly different, shinier, smoother. Monroe pressed the surface with his fingers. Hollow. His pulse quickened. "Get me a crowbar." Ramirez handed him one. Monroe slid the metal wedge into the seam and pried. The entire wall panel popped loose, nearly weightless. Behind it was a second door, metal, narrow, and unmarked. A door no one had documented. A door that didn't exist on any blueprint. A door Devin Ross somehow knew about. Monroe unlocked it with his master key. The hinges squealed as it swung open. Inside was a small room, no larger than a closet, lit by a single dying bulb. Dust floated in the air like drifting snow. On a wooden table sat a stack of inmate request slips, a box of old ID badges, confiscated contraband, and an unopened manila envelope stamped restricted. Ramirez whispered, "Sir, what is this place?" Monroe stepped in cautiously. "A storage room, but not one we control." He opened the envelope. Inside were visitation logs, handwritten, not digital. Dates going back years. And on the first page, under Approved Visitor, a single name appeared multiple times. Dr. Grant Ellery. Monroe froze. Ellery was a psychologist who'd worked inside San Quentin 8 years earlier, until he resigned abruptly. Rumors said he left after a misconduct investigation. Others said he was quietly removed because inmates were behaving strangely around him, cooperative, unified, like he could influence a room simply by standing in it. Monroe turned the next page. Dr. Ellery's signature repeated again, and again, and again, next to Devin Ross's name. Ramirez. Ross never had visitors. That's what the system shows. Ramirez swallowed. "Sir, these visits aren't in the system." Monroe crouched beside the table. The dust patterns told a story. Someone had been here recently. Not weeks ago. Not months ago. Hours ago. The room had been opened. And used. He flipped through the records faster, each page falling like a countdown. These weren't standard psychological assessments. They were private meetings involving specific inmates. Quiet ones, isolated ones, ones who didn't fit neatly into any group. Inmates who followed rules quietly until they didn't. Ross's name appeared in meeting after meeting. But then Monroe saw something that made his throat tighten. The final page wasn't a visitation log. It was a list. A list of inmates across multiple prisons. A list that ended with a handwritten note. Transfer complete. Integration successful. Integration? What? Ramirez found something else. A folded sheet taped beneath the table. He peeled it off and handed it to Monroe. The paper held a map of the prison, but with one addition, a network of lines connecting specific cells and workstations. A pattern hidden in plain sight. Monroe stared at it. "This is a route." Ramirez frowned. A route for what? Monroe traced the lines with his finger. Every path led back to the same place. North Block. Tier 4. Cell 18. Devin Ross's cell. 15 minutes later, Monroe stormed back into North Block, followed by a team of officers. Inmates watched from behind the bars, quiet, tense, like they already knew what he'd found. Monroe pointed at Ross's cell. Pull the bunk frame apart. Officers unscrewed the metal bolts. As they lifted the frame, a small plastic device slid out and clattered on the floor. A wireless transmitter. Ramirez picked it up, eyes wide. Sir, this isn't inmate made. This is professional. Monroe's pulse thundered. Someone was using Ross's cell as a relay. Someone inside our system. Officer Nunez approached. Warden, we checked Ross's kitchen station. He scratched something under the cutting board. Monroe hurried to the kitchen. The moment he flipped the board, he saw the scratched message. He watches from the yellow door. Monroe looked around. The kitchen had 2 blue doors, 1 white door and a faded yellow one near the back. He moved toward it slowly. The closer he got, the colder he felt, as if he were being watched. He opened the yellow door. It wasn't a supply closet like he expected. It was a small observation room, old, abandoned, forgotten during a renovation. A dusty chair sat facing a long, narrow window overlooking the entire kitchen floor. A perfect vantage point. Ramirez stepped inside behind him. Who used this? Monroe scanned the dust on the chair. Fresh fingerprints. Someone had been here recently. On the wall was a strip of peeling gray tape. Monroe tugged it off. Behind it was another message, written on the wall itself. He takes the quiet ones first. Ramirez's voice shook. Ross knew someone was watching him. Someone inside the prison. Monroe nodded slowly, the truth forming like fog in his mind. And someone had been watching Ross. Long before he disappeared. A scraping sound echoed from the hallway. Monroe spun. A folded note now lay on the floor outside the yellow door. Ramirez picked it up and handed it to him. A single sentence written in neat handwriting. If you want to find Ross, check who he replaced. Monroe's eyes widened. There had been another inmate in Ross's cell before his arrival. Someone who transferred out quietly. Someone who might have known everything. Ramirez, Monroe said, voice sharp, pull every transfer record for the past year. Ramirez nodded and ran. Because if Ross replaced someone, and that someone disappeared, then Ross's disappearance wasn't a one-time event. It was a pattern. And Monroe had just found the first thread. A thread someone did not want him pulling. The prison's administrative wing buzzed with printers, radios, and hurried footsteps as officers brought in box after box of transfer files. Warden Monroe sat at the long metal table, sleeves rolled up, eyes locked on the paperwork spreading across the surface like a growing storm. Ramirez returned with another stack, older, dustier, the corners curled from years of storage. These are the transfers from Cell Block North, Tier 4, Ramirez said. The ones connected to Ross's cell. Monroe flipped through them quickly. Room by room. Date by date. Inmate by inmate. Cell 18, Ross's cell, made the hair on his arms rise. 6 different inmates had occupied that cell in the last 4 years. 6. Yet none had lasted longer than a few months. And every one of their files ended the same way. Transfer requested, approved. Destination facility, blank. Departure date, confirmed. Arrival confirmation, missing. Monroe whispered, they didn't transfer out. Ramirez nodded grimly. No arrival scans. No intake logs. No video. They disappeared the same way Ross did. Monroe scanned the names again. Then he noticed something chilling. Every inmate who lived in that cell had the same profile. Quiet. Isolated. Non-violent. The kind of inmate who didn't cause alarm when moved. The kind of inmate who blended in with the crowd. The kind of inmate who wouldn't be noticed missing. Not immediately. The perfect target. Monroe rubbed his forehead. Who assigned Ross to that cell? Ramirez opened another folder. His intake form says the assignment was processed by Officer Hanley. Monroe froze. Officer Hanley had retired exactly 6 months ago. Get him in, Monroe said. Now. Hanley arrived within the hour, wearing a windbreaker and a tired expression. He looked more surprised than worried when he entered Monroe's office. Warden, he said, offering a stiff nod. Didn't expect to be back here. Sit down, Monroe said. Hanley did. His eyes scanned the room cautiously. Monroe placed the transfer records on the table. You processed all of these. Hanley examined the pages slowly, then exhaled. I knew this day was coming. Explain, Monroe said. Hanley leaned back, eyes distant. It started years ago. Before you became warden. There was a psychologist working here, Dr. Grant Ellery. Monroe exchanged a tense glance with Ramirez. We know his name, Monroe said. We found the logs. Wait until you see what happens when the next one starts. Hit subscribe, because this story is just getting started.